Good morning. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to today's National Council on U.S. Arab Relations webinar and briefing looking ahead, Middle East update at mid-year 2024, episode 2. I'm Pat Mancino. It's really an honor and privilege to welcome our guests, our distinguished speakers, guests, and viewers from across the globe. Founded in 1983, the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations is a non-governmental educational organization headquartered in Washington, D.C. To learn more about the National Council, please visit our website at www.ncusar.org to learn about our educational programs, projects, events, and activities. A special welcome to the National Council's 2024 Summer Intern Class, who have joined us for this summer for an educational and career-focused formalized academic and career program aimed at promoting knowledge and understanding of America's relations with the Middle East and the Arab region. Of course, I bring you our distinguished guests and viewers. Greetings from Mr. Howell Delano Roosevelt, the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations President and CEO, who assumed the Council's presidency post in October of last year when the Council's wonderful founding president and CEO, Dr. John Duke Anthony, retired after 40 years at the helm of the National Council. We are grateful, of course, to Dr. Anthony and now to Mr. Roosevelt. Moreover, for those of you who are not familiar with the Council's new president, Delano hails from one of America's most beloved families, and we know that Delano will carry on the Roosevelt family's tradition of patriotism, statesmanship, integrity, and public service, which is sorely needed in today's world. Thank you to the National Council staff, in particular to Roland Robinson, who worked so very hard to put this together. To our audience who are joining us for the very first time this year, really in for an education. And for many of you, this is an introduction to knowledge and information that is hard to come by and not available on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and other print and media outlets. Added together, our three guest speakers today have over 150 years of living and working in the Middle East and around the world representing the United States of America. Today's moderator is the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations' very own board member, Colonel Abbas Dahouk. Dahouk is a United States Army retired and currently serves as president and CEO of HyphenPoint LLC, a strategic advisory consultancy. Colonel is a military veteran, and his last assignment, of course, was military advisor to the State Department's Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs. Prior to that, we had the pleasure of having Abbas as the United States Army and Defense Attaché assigned to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, along with his own distinguished career of military service, along with his family, of course. Mr. David Rundell, extraordinary individual, is a former United States diplomat who spent the majority of his State Department career in the Middle East and was previously chief of mission in Saudi Arabia. Since retiring from the Foreign Service, David Rundell authored one of the most important scholarly works, in our opinion, about Saudi Arabia called Vision or Mirage, Saudi Arabia at the Crossroads. This blockbuster book is available, of course, online and at Amazon. Last, of course, and not least, is Ambassador Michael Gfoeller. Ambassador Gfoeller is a former United States ambassador and diplomat whose service included diplomatic postings in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Iraq, Russia, Poland, Moldova, and Armenia. Since retiring from the Foreign Service, Ambassador Gfoeller has been working as a consultant on foreign affairs and international security. And of course, I also want to recognize Ambassador Gfoeller's spouse, Ambassador Tatiana Gfoeller. Ambassador Gfoeller's, plural, we thank you both for your distinguished careers in government and in public service. As a reminder, audience questions for today's webinar can be emailed to our moderator, Colonel Abbas, at questions@ncusar.org. Again, questions@ncusar.org. We will do our very best to provide you with a response with our very short time together. Today's program will be recorded and available through the National Council's website and YouTube channel for rebroadcast and sharing with your colleagues, friends, and family. Now, please allow me to turn today's webinar over to my dear friend and colleague, National Council on U.S. Arab Relations, Board of Director member, the distinguished Colonel Abbas Dahouk. Colonel.
Thanks for this very generous introduction, of me at least. And good to be with all of you and with all our listeners here and abroad. And good to be with you again, Ambassador Gfoeller and Dr. Rundell. I think last time we met was in February. And it was, Gaza war was started and things happening. The United States decided to show some muscle and send warnings to all the non-state actors in the region, including Iran. Don't dare to escalate. We lost 3 soldiers in Jordan, so Jordan became part of this, operations in the Middle East. And now, just fast forward till today, things also did not de-escalate. Seems like the escalation continues. Gaza is now we have over, I think, 35,000 killed. Israel seems almost in full control. Obviously, they have the air control. They've always had it. They had the maritime control. They always had that. But now they're present, at least on the ground, all over Gaza, minus certain areas, especially in the Rafah area. That's still a disputed area. It's a bit disputed here because not only it's an important crossing point, it has borders with Egypt. It's very hard to control Rafah or contain it without coordination with the Egyptian authorities. So that's why I think one of the reasons why it's taken too long for the Israelis to do that. And then we have at least now we have some kind of peace plan that the Secretary of State has been moving to the region. I think this is his 8th visit. That's also unprecedented shuttle diplomacy to have the Secretary in there on that. So all that is happening is around us, and we're trying to make sense of it. What's next? As the peace plan will hold. As Netanyahu will find a way to appease not only his own certain his population and his opponents in Israel, also make sure that have some kind of peace or some kind of calm to move forward out of this quagmire. Both parties, Israelis want a total victory still from over Hamas. Hamas also wants to defeat Israel, and they stay in power. And it seems like we are the stalemate. And but our administration, the Biden administration, seems hopeful. They presented and endorsed a 3-phase peace plan, and the world is looking. What's next? On the United Nations, U.S. was vetoes or has vetoed multiple resolutions. Last week they passed one. That was a good move. 14 voted yes, and 1 abstained was Russia. But at least now the whole international community, the United Nations, all on the same line. So. I don't know. I started with Gaza because I think this is the big gorilla in the region, and there's other issues we'll discuss later on. But let me start with you, Ambassador, on what are your thoughts on the Gaza campaign and the peace deal, and looking ahead at the same time on that.
Well, I continue to be slightly pessimistic about the chance for a ceasefire deal in the near term, because the interests of the 2 major parties, Hamas and Israel, are so diametrically opposed. Hamas wants to survive the conflict intact, still in charge of the ruins of Gaza, and they want a massive aid package financed by the Arab oil producers in the Gulf. In their latest statement, they were talking about rebuilding Gaza within 3 to 5 years. That would really be something, given the scale of the destruction that's taken place. Israel, on the other hand, wants Gaza without Hamas. Their perception is that if Hamas remains in charge of Gaza, even in a ruined state, at the end of the war, then Hamas will be able to declare victory and say they endured the siege and came out on top in the end. So I don't really see how we're going to bridge that gap. I hope we do, but hope is not a strategy. And at this point, I don't really see an end to this thing until the Israelis have finished doing what they're doing in Rafah, where they're now essentially sitting on top of and presumably also inside the vast network of cross-border tunnels there that Hamas built to provision themselves over the last couple of decades. So I think the war is going to drag on for some time, which is unfortunate because it is, of course, destabilizing the whole region, primarily because of the decision of the Houthis to launch this pretty successful naval operation around the Bab el-Mandeb, which is having an enormous impact on Egypt by cutting traffic in the canal by 65%, which is a disaster for the Egyptians. So, yeah, I'm not too optimistic. And I think that the future of a Abraham Accord-style deal with the Saudis is also dependent on the outcome of the situation in Gaza. Until there's a ceasefire, I don't think the Saudis can really move forward on a strategic reconciliation with Israel involving the establishment of diplomatic relations. So I think the fighting will go on for some time, unfortunately.
So, Dr. Rundell, do you think the fighting will go on, or do you think this three-phase peace plan that is brought in by President Biden and also seems like somewhat approved or by Netanyahu and his government? What are your thoughts on what will happen next in Gaza and the peace plan?
I think that the I don't know how I don't know quite how you. Some of the people you said are new to this subject, so who are watching. So I have to perhaps give them a little bit of background. And that may be tedious to those of you who are long in the tooth in the Middle East. But, you know, the Israelis made a decision some 20 years ago that they no longer faced a military threat from any Arab state, that the Egyptians or the Syrians were not likely, certainly not the Saudis or the Jordanians, were going to attack them. And so they radically changed the structure of their military from a ground-forced army to one that focused on air defense, cybersecurity, and the Air Force. And they literally demobilized infantry units and armored divisions. And they were living with the belief that they had a deal with Hamas. They allowed Hamas to continue to receive funds from overseas, and they thought that things were, they had a modus vivendi with Hamas. They were obviously taken by surprise by this attack in October. And they really did not have the resources to end this thing quickly, because you have to remember that they had to send substantial forces both to the Lebanon front and to the West Bank to maintain security in those areas as well. So their plan to quickly end things in with Hamas it's taking them a lot longer than they expected, because they're still having to use substantial forces in other places. And they've been successful, I think, in maintaining security in those other places. And I'm often happy to quote myself when I was right and ignore myself when I was wrong. But on our last talk, I said I did not think that the war would break out in Lebanon anytime soon, and I was right about that. I'm not so sure I'd make that statement quite so boldly today. But in any event, the Israelis have maintained their other two borders safely. So I also said during our February talk that the Israelis were losing, and that they had already lost up to some point, which surprised a number of people. But the reality is that they have not defeated Hamas yet. They have not got their hostages back, and they have not returned their citizens to the northern part of Israel, which were their three stated goals. So they may not have lost completely, but they're certainly not winning at the moment. Which leads me to, and so with that background, I'll answer your question, which is I agree with Mike that I think that this, like so many peace plans in the Middle East, that the UN's resolution is stillborn, and that I think if I'm not mistaken, the Hamas has already said it's inadequate. And the Israelis, whatever they say under pressure from the United States, are certainly not going to want to live with Hamas in its previous form ever again. And I think that the Israeli population is fairly united in that, from what I can see. So then that leads you to the final question about Israel, and this you probably are going to ask this. So I would say that the resignation of Gantz is an effort to provoke a new election, and it remains to be seen whether that will happen. Again, I don't think it's going to happen today or tomorrow, because I think Netanyahu will manage to hold his coalition together, and that doing that means that he has to continue to take a hard line with Hamas. So anyway, those would be my thoughts.
That's good. Let me add a couple of things on this. I know from a strategic perspective, obviously, Israel is losing. The Palestinian cause is much, much popular than ever. That's a loss. You have now 146 countries that recognize Palestine as a state out of 193, and some of them European countries. That's on the rise. And the public opinion everywhere is against Israel, so they have to do something about that. Support another state, or just come up with some kind of a parity of dignity on both sides. But I want to mention on the people. There's a few polls on the Israeli citizens, between the Israeli Jewish citizens and the Israeli Arabs. And it says here that 75% of the Israeli Arabs basically thinks that the war went too far. Only 4% Israelis against the war, but 75% of Israeli Arabs, they think the war went too far. So there's also within the Israeli Arabs, which we don't hear much of their voice. It seems like their voice is squelched. Don't hear much about which way they're going. But there's also frustration in there. I just so
did that poll talk about the Jewish settlers, or not settlers, but Jewish citizens in Israel? What they think?
I think there is, but that's what caught my attention is the 74% of the Arab Israelis think the war went too far. They're not against the war, but they think that went too far. It's been on for, they're used to the 6-day wars and 2-week wars and short wars. This went on too far, and you have so many innocent lives that died in the process. But okay, we'll continue to watch Gaza. I think it's very critical also to the U.S. elections, and that's one of the
started hanging out there in Cairo in the 70s, so it's been a while now. But the Houthi I mentioned that only because I have a history of focusing on the Houthi danger that goes back to my time at U.S. Central Command. So I remember back in 2008 focusing on the Houthi raids on Sana'a. At the time, they were based in Sada in northern Yemen, and they would launch a campaign every spring. And by the middle of the summer, they would be at the international airport outside of Sana'a. And then Ali Abdullah Saleh's forces would rally and push them back again with support from the northern Yemeni tribes. This happened for years, 15 years or so in a row. And I remember telling my superiors at Central Command, U.S. military, this is something we really need to focus on. And, the response from Washington was really interesting at the time. It was, look, no one has the bandwidth to focus on this. We're obsessed right now with Iraq and with Afghanistan. Iraq is enough, of a problem for us to deal with in the Middle East. Yemen will sort itself out. And I said, no, actually it won't, because these guys are Iranian-backed. And so what Iran is trying to do is repeat the success of its Hezbollah experiment in southern Lebanon on the Arabian Peninsula, and that is a major strategic move. So it's happened really over the last 16 years since I and some other people sounded the alarm on this is that the Iranians have succeeded in creating a client state in what used to be northern Yemen. What's interesting is from the U.S. perspective, everything has flipped, as it often happens in history. So back in the Cold War, southern Yemen was enemy Yemen. It was Soviet Yemen. The Soviets had a nuclear submarine base rather on Socotra Island and an airfield right outside of Aden. Now Aden is the capital of internationally recognized Yemen, which we and the Saudis and the Emiratis support, whereas the Houthis control Sana'a, which used to be our Yemen. So it's completely flipped. But getting them out of Sana'a now looks like almost an impossible task. Nobody really wants to invest the kind of military force necessary to do that. So we've got a problem because they have reduced international shipping traffic in the Red Sea, particularly coming out of the Suez Canal, by 66% at this point. This has been going on since October, when they declared their solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza. Is this really the situation going back to the Trojan War? What was the Trojan War about? It was about the Trojans connecting tolls from Greek shipping going through the Hellespont to the Black Sea. This is a similar thing. The Houthis want to be able to charge tolls on shipping going through the Bab el-Mandeb. They want funding so they can continue their reconquista of Yemen, their war against our Western and moderate Arab-backed Yemen in Aden. And so this is going to be an extraordinarily difficult problem to deal with. I think what we ought to do is intensify our naval campaign against the Houthis. What we're doing now is clearly not working. And we're forcing international shipping to take the long way around, the southern tip of Africa, which means we're going back to shipping realities prior to the creation of the Suez Canal. This is a big change for world commerce. And it's amazing that a non-state actor can do this. But are they really still a non-state actor, or are they another Yemeni state, funded and to a large extent supported by Iran, threatening the integrity of Saudi Arabia? I mean, Houthi territorial claims don't just involve the old imamate of Yemen. They see themselves, of course, as the descendants of the Shiite imamate that was ruling there until the 60s. They see themselves also as having a standing claim on the Hijaz, which is a potential problem for Saudi Arabia. Well, the truce that's been negotiated by the Chinese between the Saudis, the Iranians, and their client states hold. I saw that the Saudi foreign minister just a day or two ago met with the Iranian foreign minister. I guess that's a hopeful sign, but I can't believe that Riyadh actually trusts the Iranians' intentions in this regard. So there's bigger things going on here than Gaza.
You're right. I mean, as recently, last 2 weeks also, the Houthis are claiming that the Mecca is also, they have rights to, just like Iranians and themselves, to Mecca, the Saudi royal family. They're not the right custodian for the two holy shrines. So they're claiming that as well. But I want to add another story on the raising the alarm. Not only the U.S. CENTCOM was raising the alarm. I remember in 2014 when I was in Riyadh, defense attaché, Saudis raised the alarm to us when Sinai fell, and Iran started sending the aircraft to land in Sana'a airport with communication equipment and things. So Iran saw that as a chance to beef up their support directly to the Houthis, and that's what the Saudis formed the coalition and basically was asking us. Said, look, we have to do something. You need our help. And at that time, the Obama administration basically saying, look, this administration is not about war. We're pulling out of the region. And the last thing we want the Saudi government to drag us into a war, which is from the U.S. perspective, they're looking at this as another civil war. Here we go again. The Houthis are fighting again for the fifth, sixth time. And at the same time, the Obama administration did not want to jeopardize the nuclear negotiations with Iran, so decided to say, you know what, you guys are on your own, go fight it. And fast forward now, we form a coalition to fight the Houthis, and the Saudis said, well, we're trying to do a peace process with the Houthis. You're on your own.
Well, you're absolutely right, Abbas. I mean, and it's a series of missed opportunities. We underestimated the danger. Yeah. There's now a second Hezbollah on the Arabian Peninsula, using Iranian military technology, particularly ballistic missile technology, but also drones, advanced drones. The drones are the new tanks. I say to everybody, this is a military revolution that we haven't seen the likes of since the First World War, when tanks appeared on the battlefield. This is the age of drones, and they're mastering that technology with the help from the Iranians, because it's a perfect asymmetric weapon to use against Western interests, and we're not ready for it at this point. We're not. Drone boats in the Red Sea.
Drone boats,
designed by the Iranians and launched by the Houthis. Who saw it coming, right?
I know. They're launching as far as Haifa, and as far north as Israel. I mean, the ballistic missiles, and supposedly now they have a supersonic missiles too. There's a couple of claims that they have some. Dr. Rundell, what do you think the Houthis' intentions and going forward here?
Well, I don't disagree with anything that either of you have said. I just would like to reemphasize to those who are new to this that, this is, again, another fundamental blunder of the United States in the Middle East. The failure to recognize that these people were a problem. And the reality is, if you recall, the Western media, and you cited some at the beginning who are generally not good sources of analysis, all we heard was that the wicked Saudis were waging a terrible war in Yemen and killing lots of civilians, and that we needed to stop helping them. And the reality was the Saudis, and let's be clear, the Emiratis as well. The Emiratis sent military forces for the first time ever overseas to try and stop this, because the people who live in, one thing I learned in my career in the Middle East is that it often pays to listen to the people who actually live there. The reality that people believe in the United States about the Middle East is often divorced from the reality on the ground. And Yemen is a good example of that. So the Saudis and the Emiratis were willing to commit their own lives to trying to stop the Houthis, and we walked away. And it's just a statement of fact that Emiratis died on the ground because we refused to provide air cover and air support for them. So, I think we are kind of reaping what we sowed. When the Saudis and the Emiratis were willing to try and stop the Houthis, we did nothing. Then we took them off the terrorist list. And again, you can make the claim that this was all done because we wanted to cozy up to Iran and get an agreement with them. And whether you think that agreement was ever going to work or not is a debatable point. But in any event, you can make that case. But the reality at the moment is the Saudis have solved their problem. Okay, the Saudis said we couldn't beat them. You wouldn't help us defeat them. So we have no choice but to make peace. And they have made peace with the Iranians and therefore with the Houthis as well. So this war that people talk about in Yemen, for as far as the Saudis are concerned, is finished. There has been a truce there for essentially. There no more Yemenis are getting killed by Saudis. No more Saudis are being killed by Yemeni rockets. That could always turn around, and that's what the Iranians want. The same way they keep Hezbollah on a leash in Lebanon as a threat to the Israelis. But for right now, the Saudis and the Emiratis are out of the game, and we're left dealing with these people by ourselves. And so far, our efforts to do that have, when this first started, the idea that you were going to fire a couple of missiles at the Houthis and that was going to stop them and scare them and they were going to run away, that was truly naive. And so all we're doing is now, actually, we've made it worse. So in any event, as Michael said, when you look at gasoline prices, when you look at bread prices, when you look at inflation in your stores, part of that is because of the dramatically increased shipping costs that the world is now dealing with because the Suez Canal is effectively doesn't exist for most people. And finally, the only thing I would say in the end is it hasn't bothered the Saudis. They're not attacking Saudi ships or ships carrying Saudi oil. So the Saudis made their peace. In any event, the rest of us are paying a big price, especially the Europeans, for a lot of trade that is now having to take a longer route, and a route which, for those who are interested in these things, creates a lot more pollution because sea-borne shipping is a major source of CO2, as everybody knows, and now there's more of it. So in any event, those are my thoughts on the Houthis.
No, good. Thank you. Right, and the world is paying a price. You're right. Probably the Europeans, the Americans, everything is it's costing more. But the surprising piece here for me is also Egypt, because they're really the Suez Canal is not operating at 100% like it used to. But you don't see the Egyptians, at least overtly, talking about countering the Houthis. Just a quick note on this. Anybody like why? What's Egypt? Why Egypt? It seems like is not saying much about it.
Well, Egypt has been the recipient of about $50 billion in increased foreign aid since the beginning of the Gaza crisis, and that is about the only positive thing I can think of to say about the Gaza crisis at this point, is that we and the Europeans, most of the EU, did respond to the dire economic crisis in Egypt, which was about to lead to major political instability last fall. The international community did respond this time, and thank God for that. But it's not a permanent solution. Ultimately, if the Red Sea ends up being unusable by most of international navigation for a long period of time, it's going to have really dire effects on Egypt, and that is something to be concerned about. That's one of the main reasons to reestablish the freedom of navigation. If we think back to Angela Merkel's decision back in 2015 to let 1.5 million illegal migrants come into Germany, mostly from regions stretching from Iraq to Afghanistan, this was highly destabilizing to German politics, and is really the root cause behind one of the root causes behind the massive shift to the right we see in European politics. Now imagine the destabilization of Egypt economically, much closer to Europe. Egypt is a ticking time bomb on the southern boundary of Europe. The stability of Egypt should be a primary concern to us. This is one of the main reasons, again, why we need to find a solution to the Gaza crisis as well, because, we're 2.5 million Gazans. Simply to enter Egypt at some point, it would be deeply destabilizing to Egypt, which is on shaky foundations economically, demographically, and politically. I'm one of the people who maintain that President Sisi has acted in a way that's been very, very much consistent with U.S. interests, and his leadership is something we ought to be trying to preserve at this point, not undermine. And, if Egypt were destabilized in a major way, the potential would be there for millions, perhaps tens of millions of economic refugees, migrants, to stream eastward into Arabia and northward into Europe, and it would be very destabilizing for both regions. So the stability of Egypt should be at the top of our list of things to do.
Okay. How about we talked about the Iran supporting the non-state actors, but April this year, for the first time, actually, Iran took the fight itself, right? Took the fight to Israel, and they launched those about 300 missiles, and that was quite a response. I mean, the reports that most of it, maybe 30%, didn't reach the target, did not probably collapse halfway or so on. And the rest of them, almost all of them, minus 2 or 3 that landed in Israel, and landed in a strategic location too. Landed at that airbase. Forgot the name of the airbase, but that's where Israel has the F-35. So that to itself, that's a big accomplishment. They were actually, one of the rockets landed on that specific airbase. But the rest of them were intercepted by U.S. and France and United Kingdom, and Jordanians also participated. There was a lot of intelligence came out of radar systems out of Saudi Arabia and I think the UAE. I think so. This was also unprecedented. I mean, Iran, you can have a peace process with them, or peace talk, peace agreement, but if something happened, these guys are willing to pull the trigger like this. I mean, those 300 rockets had the United States and decided or said, you know what, this is between you and Israel, between you and Iran. We're not going to intervene in it. That would have been a disaster. I think probably would have the Iron Dome would have stopped some of them, but most likely not all of them, especially the ballistic missiles, because they're fast movers and it'll be very hard to track and destroy. And Iran could have launched another 300. I mean, they have more than that. They can. That's the one thing what Iran can do. It just can do another volley and another volley, and that'll be a problem. So Iran's it's just hard to also see where they're going with it. They suffer. When we killed Qasem Soleimani, we thought this will bring him down. They did it. And then when Israel killed the number one guy, the logistics person in the consulate, also the operations continue as normal. And then recently we have the president that died in a helicopter crash, and that's a little mysterious, flying an old U.S.-made helicopter, which is, I don't know, why would the Secret Service or people allow him to fly a helicopter? It's an American helicopter. That means most of the parts are secondhand or smuggled or made by somebody else. They're not really airworthy from a U.S. standards. But anyhow, yet the country continues. I mean, such a resilient regime, and now they're going through elections. So does Iran, you think, will continue just the status quo right now, continue to operate through proxies and watch to see what happened in Gaza? And what if they're poked again? And this time, what would they do? I mean, what do you think Iran's next? I know you're not in the decision-making process, but just to see what's your rationale, their calculus in the next 6 months to at least the next election, the U.S.
Look,
election.
I think the answer is that the Iranians did not want to have a war with Israel. They felt that the provocation of having their embassy in Damascus attacked required a response, which I think most countries would agree that if somebody attacks your embassy, you probably have to do something to respond. But the response was very measured. All right, you have to. I mean, you have to recognize that the United States, I believe, talked through intermediaries, probably Oman, to the Iranians, and the Iranians gave plenty of warning of what they were going to do. They didn't attack any civilian areas, and they didn't fire all the missiles that they could have, and they didn't really fire any from Lebanon. And so that's the Iranian perspective, is that this was a response, but a very measured one. From the Israeli perspective, I don't think this could be seen as a great success. The West allowed the Israelis, again, the media here portrayed it as a big success for the Israelis. First of all, the Israelis did not do it by themselves. They had major help from a lot of other people, and as you pointed out, probably could not have done it by themselves. Secondly, they did not succeed completely. Okay, as you again pointed out, some of the ballistic missiles, which are the ones that count, got through, despite all of the efforts, multinational efforts. And if those ballistic missiles had been nuclear tipped, you only need one of them to get through. So for the Israelis, this was a pretty sobering reality. And then finally, the Israelis have always relied upon what you would call retaliation escalation, which is if you hit me once, I'll hit you twice. And if you hit me twice, I'll hit you 4 times. And this is their policy, has been all of their history, and it's been largely successful. But in this instance, they did not do that. The response that they had to the Iranians was they fired a couple of missiles, but much less than the Iranians did on them. So this, I think in some ways you could argue this was a success of the Biden administration, because I don't imagine that this happened without a lot of intervention on their part, and both the Israelis and the Iranians, to keep this thing from spiraling out of control. So I think that's what happened. And I think that the wake-up call was really for the Israelis, that the Iranians have the ability to hit you with ballistic missiles. Now, you asked me what's going to happen now. I mean, that was a long preamble, but whoever killed the Raisi, and maybe it was an accident, this was an ancient helicopter. When I read that they were flying in Augusta Bell 212, I was shocked. I mean, I don't even think you've probably ever been in one of those. I mean, actually, it's not even an American helicopter. It's made in Italy. Under license from Bell. Anyway, this is the old Huey helicopter from Vietnam. So it could very easily have crashed by itself. On the other hand, there are plenty of people who wanted to see the end of Raisi. Now and just to put this in context, who's Raisi? There is a succession struggle going on in Iran right now as to what's going to happen when the Supreme Leader Khamenei passes away. And that struggle is largely between the clerics and the, if you will, the Revolutionary Guard, who are essentially the secret police, the military secret police. And Raisi was Khamenei's guy. And he's gone now. So it's not clear what's going to happen, who's going to take over, who's going to become the new supreme leader. Iran has been made more fragile by this event. Their leadership struggle has become more convoluted. And as Mike and I have written in the past, and I think we've written this more than once, that we don't think that a war with Iran is a good idea. We think the Iranians are not the Houthis. The Iranians have a lot of ways to bite back in very substantial ways, both to us and to our allies in the region. And so we do not want a war with the Iranians. We also now disagree with the idea that you can negotiate with the Iranians. I've said on this program before that I don't blame President Biden for trying to have a nuclear agreement with them, but I think that to try and resurrect that at this point is a fool's errand. So that leaves us really with the only way of getting rid of this regime is through civil activities. And I'll let Mike talk a little bit more about his experience and how that worked in Russia and how it might be able to work in Iran.
Okay,
Mike, what do you got?
Really quickly, I think what I'd like to say is that there are two Irans. There's the regime and then there's the Iranian people. If you look at the latest polling data from the Gaman Institute in the Netherlands, which is really doing the best work on this, of the Iranian population, only 20 to 30% of the population describe themselves as Shiite Muslims. Most Iranians these days say they have no religion. Or they describe themselves as spiritual. So if you're trying to run a Shiite Islamic Republic, this is a problem. It's a similar problem to what Turkey will face in a generation, because how can you have a Turkish republic when 50% of the population is Kurdish? That's a problem for the next generation. 30 years from now, the NC-USAR will be talking about that one, because Kurdistan will be becoming a great power in the Middle East in a generation, to the chagrin of Turkey and Iraq. But for today, the real problem is in Iran, because so many of my Iranian friends tell me that they come from families that were once pious, but having grown up in something called the Shiite Islamic Republic, they have decided to become atheists or agnostics or whatever. And the bulk of the population now, I would say 80%, are in strong opposition to the regime. Inflation's running at 40%. Iran is covered by a dense network of underground, technically illegal trade unions that are constantly striking. There's a very powerful civil society movement that wants to establish democratic governments in Iran. Most of my Iranian friends tell me, we don't want to change much. We just want to change the Islamic Republic to the Republic of Iran and leave it at that. And so we have a largely secular, pro-Western population that is yearning to get out from under the current religious dictatorship. And the smart thing for us to be doing in Iran would be to pivot from our current policy of basically supporting the regime in the hope that we can revive the nuclear agreement, which is never going to work anyway because it has almost no enforcement mechanisms. And as someone who spent too much of my life doing nuclear arms control and disarmament stuff in the former Soviet Union, I can tell you really need to focus on the enforcement mechanisms, which are just not in the JCPOA. Leaving that aside for a second, we did in Eastern Europe to loosen and ultimately remove communist hegemony was to focus on civil society. It worked extremely well in the entire Warsaw Pact. We had a chance to do that in Iran during the Green Revolution. We didn't do it. We had a chance to do it again over the last 2 years during the current women life freedom uprising in Iran. We didn't do it. We really, at some point, need to begin to adopt to Iran the same focus on human rights, civil society, and workers' rights that helped us to bring freedom to Eastern Europe. I know it's very fashionable right now to talk about how American foreign policy always ends in blunders and tragedies and mistakes. But if you were to talk to half the members of the EU who used to be in the Warsaw Pact, they would have another view. The fact of the matter is our greatest foreign policy victory since World War II was the largely peaceful, almost entirely peaceful liberation of Eastern Europe from communism. And we didn't do that by invading or using military force. We did it by focusing on the best parts of our own tradition, which are, the values that support workers' rights, human rights, women's rights. We need to focus on that in Iran. We have an audience waiting for us. We just have to address it. And when change comes to Iran, as I think it inevitably will, positive change, then this network of malign organizations that the current regime maintains will fade away in the same way that the Soviet Union's network of communist parties and pro-communist organizations across Western Europe, particularly in the Warsaw Pact, but also in Western Europe, faded away with the collapse of communism. So we need to go after the ideology in its home. And the way to do that is to support the Iranian people who are already struggling to get out from under the current regime.
Yeah, that's interesting to see on the people's perspective of the population as well in Turkey and Iran 10 years or 20 years from now. How would that change the dynamics of the region at large? But back, Dr. Rundell, you mentioned Hezbollah that they held back. They have an arsenal of missiles and so on. They could also now reach Israel with a shorter period of time. So that means Israel has less time to react to it. Today, I think this week, the Lebanese army commander, he's in town and talking about South Lebanon. And so it's also an interesting area of operation. You got Israel is worried that October 7th could happen again, on the northern borders, because Hamas has is more capable and have rockets, and they can do something like this. At the same time, the United States say they don't want to escalate, and they're trying to enforce the 1701 resolution. You have the envoy Hochstein trying to figure out a diplomatic deal to quiet the waters a little bit. Part of that is to bring Hezbollah back to the Litani River, so north of the borders of Israel, 10-15 kilometers. And bring the Lebanese army to regain control of the south. So they have some kind of plan. This way, allow the Israelis to bring back their settlers, about 100 or 75, 100,000 settlers. They live in hotels right now in Israel. They left their homes back in October 7th, and school's about to start. So Israel has to do something. And it seems like the settlers they're not willing to go back to the north unless Hezbollah gone. Just moving Hezbollah 15 or 10 kilometers north of the border is not secure enough to the people. And so, what do you think? This is also a combustible area. Do you think Israel will settle for a diplomatic effort by the 1701, or basically just Hezbollah said, okay, we'll go back 10 kilometers and we'll stop there? Would they trust that? Would that happen? And especially under Netanyahu and the right-wing government. What do you think? Assuming Gaza still the same, or Gaza already went through a peace plan. So either way, the peace or no peace, how would Israelis reconcile this also existential threat from the north without military operation? Or with
I think
military
the answer
operation?
there is the Israelis themselves are divided, as they are on many things, but they're divided about what to do in the north. And if I can repeat my prediction, I don't think either the Hezbollah or the Israelis want to see an escalation at this point in time. Certainly not until they finish whatever they're going to do in Gaza. So I do not expect the situation on the Lebanese border to explode into a full-fledged war. I could be wrong. I could be wrong tomorrow on that.
Well, you're right so far.
I'm right so far, but like a stopped clock, right? You're right once a day or twice a day. I just don't see. I mean, look, the last time the Israelis went into Lebanon, they did a tremendous amount of damage, which is what I spoke about. This retribution escalation. So I think that the leader and the leader of Hezbollah, he's on record as having said that, if he'd known what was coming, he wouldn't have done it last time. So, and he's actually said that. So I don't think they want to see Lebanon destabilized or invaded. And I don't think the Iranians want to unleash them either at this moment. If I was going to look at what I think is a more volatile situation right now than the Lebanese border, I would look at Jordan. Jordan has got problems right now. There have been far more anti-monarchy demonstrations. There have been far more anti-government riots. There have been even terrorist attacks on strategic installations. And this is all brought to us by our friends in Tehran, siding with discontented Palestinians in Jordan. Many of them were Jordanian citizens of Palestinian origin. But this volatile mix in Jordan. Jordan is essentially a pro-Western status quo country with a very divided population. And ever since the days of Nasser, Nasser used to go and try and stir up trouble in Jordan. And it's funny, in some ways, I look at the Iranians as the contemporary version of Nasser. Nasser was the big anti-Western, get the Americans and the British out of the region, get rid of Israel. He was, if you will, the Arab populist nationalist, if that's a term I hear bantered about now. So now we have the Iranians doing the exact same thing. They are the populist nationalist force in the Middle East, and they recruit anybody they can who would be willing to help destabilize pro-Western regimes. And right now, I would argue that the prime candidate is Jordan, probably not Lebanon, where they feel they already have enough influence and they just keep it for a rainy day.
Well, I'm sure Iran would like to do something in Jordan. They have been trying for a while. They've done destabilize Iraq and Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and they would like to do something for Jordan. But as you're right, that'll be devastating for the region and also for U.S. interest.
Let me just add one
yes,
word. I think that Iran wants to continue its malign activities. The Iranian regime, again, sticking to the distinction I made earlier. I don't think the Iranian people particularly support any of this, particularly as they see the windfall profits from enhanced Iranian oil exports going to the Houthis and Hezbollah rather than to reviving the Iranian economy. So that's an important distinction to keep in mind. But I think Iran wants to avoid an all-out military conflict with Israel or a general regional war. I totally agree with what David said earlier about the way the crisis in April was contained. I would just add this observation. Iran is now accelerating its efforts to enrich uranium. It's building up a large stockpile of uranium enriched to over 60% purity. So this much highly enriched uranium is really only useful if they're planning a breakout to nuclear weapon status, that they want to actually produce several nuclear warheads. Just want to remind everybody that this clock is also ticking in the background. People don't like to talk about it, but the fact of the matter is, it would really only take them a few weeks at this point to produce enough HEU to create at least four to five warheads, maybe more. We don't really have visibility because, again, there's no viable inspection regime at this point. The IAEA can't go in and look. Even under the JCPOA, they weren't allowed at all to inspect military facilities, which is a ridiculous limitation to the agreement. But I also want to attack one other idea that is normally accepted, which is that it doesn't really matter if Iran enriches uranium to 89% plus to warhead level enrichment, because after all, it would take them longer to create the really fine mechanical assemblies that you need to produce the warhead components to actually produce a warhead that can fit on a missile and work when it's delivered. So I don't think that's true at all. I don't see why the Iranians, after trying for so many decades to develop nuclear weapons, wouldn't parallel process this. I think we have to assume that, in the military facilities that we can't get into, engineers working for the Iranian MOD are beavering away at at creating the warhead assemblies. At the same time, other people in their scientific establishment are enriching uranium. So just like we failed to prevent the emergence of Pakistan and India as nuclear powers a couple decades ago, I think the same thing's going to happen here. And when Iran has Hezbollah and the Houthis and nuclear weapons, that will really change the security equation for Israel. Because the next time they decide to launch a missile barrage from Hezbollah to northern Israel, and the Israelis threaten to launch a ground invasion or a massive air assault in response, the Iranians will be able to threaten Israel with nuclear weapons. And as Ayatollah Rafsanjani said years ago, Israel is a one-bomb country. His words, not mine. So this is happening in the background while we're obsessed with everything else. I think, therefore, the Iranians' need is a continuation of the current situation, which keeps us distracted and tied down in a number of ways and buys them time to finish their emergence, to complete their emergence as a nuclear weapons state.
Comment on the nuclear weapons. Yeah, you're right. Trigger mechanism is hard, but probably Russians and North Koreans are willing to, if the political climate correct, they're willing to help them quickly or provide them with
100%.
But maybe, yeah. But on the enrichment, as we know, Israel enriching already, and obviously Iranians are doing the same thing. And on the background, also, we have this U.S. Saudi Defense Pact. And part of that is providing the Saudis with the nuclear technology. And the U.S. is presenting the they call it 1-2-3 agreement, meaning you're not allowed. We can give you all the materials, you just use it. And so I think the Saudis are in a pickle here. I mean, this is accepting this nuclear without enriching, while Iran, we are pretty much allowing Iran to do it. They're still doing it. So I think I'm not sure how that. If Saudis would agree, just like the Emiratis did for a 1-2-3 agreement and not enrich, or do you think the Saudis will say, you know what, okay, we'll take it, we'll not enrich, which is, I think it's a hard pill to swallow in this political climate and having Iran enriching and Israel enriching at the same time. So can you have a quick answer on this, and then we'll have a follow-up to that?
So just a quick answer. I think that the Saudis will stick to the position they outlined actually through Mohammed bin Salman a couple of years ago, where they said, look, if the Iranians actually succeed in acquiring their own nuclear weapons, then we'll have to move in the same direction. I think that's their core policy, but I yield to David's interpretation as well.
I think that's right. And I would be surprised if they, there are lots of ways to finesse agreements and make compromises and write vague language. But I would be surprised if the Saudis agreed to an adamant and clear ban on their enrichment. They have other options. There are places they could go besides the United States. And so I think they would consider that, probably they would consider it humiliation, that they were forced to sign this, and that this would not go down well for an increasingly nationalistic government. So no, I don't think they'll sign on to the same kind of 1-2-3 agreement that everybody else does. Now, I could be wrong again. Maybe they, but I don't think so. But as I say, there's lots of ways you can write a 1-2-3 agreement. It's not really a 1-2-3 agreement that says it says it's a cat, but really it's a mouse. So we'll see.
I agree with you as well. One other thing also, maybe we can talk about the 80-year petrodollar agreement. Supposedly, Saudi Arabia opted not to renew it. I don't know if you read something about it, if you know, talk a little bit about it. I think this is an historic event. I mean, we talk about petrodollars. I mean, that controls the oil market, and all of a sudden now others can trade with other currency. So what do you think? Is that a big event or just no event?
I think it's noise. I don't think it's a big event. First of all, I'm unaware of any written agreement that is periodically renewed. And I was economic counselor, political counselor, commercial counselor, chief of mission. All the time in Saudi Arabia, nobody ever showed me a written agreement that said the Saudis are going to sell oil in dollars or that this was something that we formally renewed periodically. So that would be news to me if such a thing existed. There may well be an informal agreement that the Saudis, but there are many informal agreements, like the one that will come to save the Saudis if they're ever attacked. There's no written agreement on that yet. We sent 500,000 people to defend them when Kuwait was invaded. So that's the first thing. I don't think there's a written agreement that formally needs to be renewed. The second thing is that the Saudis already trade oil in currencies other than the dollar on a limited basis, and I expect them to continue to do that. And the third thing is that the Saudis peg their currency to the dollar. In order to do that, they need to continue to sell oil in dollars. I don't see any likelihood that they're going to break the peg with the dollar in the near future. And therefore, I think they'll continue to sell most of their oil in dollars.
Okay. Good. Last question before we, I think it's already over an hour. But I wanted to say we have the presidential elections. We got, I think, Biden going on his second term, and also Trump will be his second term if he gets elected. And I think this is also another historical time where both presidents, either one, the incumbent or the president, will be a second term. How do you see the situation quickly in the Middle East under Biden as a second term, or under Trump as a returning president? And also in the background, we have the Russians are coming, right? They're coming to our closer and closer to our coast. So we're like, so how is it
here? They're not coming; they're here, 20 miles from Florida.
Yeah. So quick comment on that.
I'll leave that to Mike.
Your thoughts.
Well, look, in terms of should Trump return to power, I think we'll see him refocusing on the kind of diplomacy that led to the Abraham Accords. But that's going to be tied to the fate of the situation in Gaza. And we've already discussed that in some detail. So I hope that, under either President Trump or Biden, we get an extension of the Abraham Accords to Saudi Arabia. But Gaza will have to be dealt with first. And that's a tall order. In terms of what Russia is doing now, it's a bit further afield, of course, because we're talking about the Caribbean now, not the Persian Gulf. But many observers may have missed this, but a couple of weeks ago at the end of May, on May 22nd and May 26th, long-range attack drones launched by the Ukrainians damaged two strategic early warning radars in Russia, one at a place called Armavir in southern Russia, and another at a place called Orsk on the Russian border with Kazakhstan. Why is this important? It's important because unlike the United States, which has an extensive array of early warning satellites in various Earth orbits looking for potential ICBM attacks, and giving us a 20 to 30 minute warning window for any incoming missiles. The Russians depend on long-range strategic radars because they don't have the technology to put together a similar network of satellites, at least so far. So by taking these radars out, what you do is you reduce the warning time for the leadership in Moscow of an incoming ICBM attack from 21 minutes to 6 minutes. So that is blinding them really to a strategic attack. So what Putin appears to have decided to do is to send two nuclear missile launch vehicles, the Kazan Yasin class nuclear submarine, and the Admiral Gorshkov, which is a frigate that carries nuclear-tipped Zircon hypersonic cruise missiles to Havana, Cuba, which is where they are this morning. And what this does, of course, is it gives him the possibility of striking the United States with nuclear warheads with zero warning time, because at hypersonic speeds, the delivery time is only a minute or less for any target in the United States. So this came after he announced about a week ago at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum that he would be taking asymmetric steps to disperse high-value Russian weapon systems to unusual locations to make us think about, what Ukraine is doing with these long-range attacks. So, yeah, this is the first time since 1961 that Russian nuclear-capable missiles have been in Cuba. That's the bottom line.
Fascinating.
I would argue that I'll just add to that the listeners ought to understand that we are being dragged into a war with Russia over Ukraine. Many people would argue that we're already at war with Russia, and that we're now experiencing serial escalation, and that attacking these radar stations, which were a purely defensive system and had nothing, and they were strategically designed to stop or to detect attacks from the United States. They had nothing to do with fighting in Ukraine. And that to allow the Ukrainians to destroy these it was provocative. I mean, you can't really, it's trying to blind the Russians to a strategic attack from the United States, which has nothing to do with what's going on in Ukraine. So we are slowly but surely getting ourselves dragged into a conflict that is probably unnecessary. And Mike and I have again said for 2 years that it's time to negotiate a settlement here rather than to continue to have more and more Ukrainians killed in a proxy war that they aren't going to win. Anyway, that's the end of the sermon there. We feel strongly about that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting observation on the radars. I mean, this is something, Russia is here, Russia is in Ukraine, Russia is in Syria, Russia with Iran, and a lot of Russian equipment going through Iran to Houthis. So it is a low boil war with the Russians. So thanks. That was a very good conversation with you both. I enjoyed it. It's very complicated region, and so I hope we shed some light on it. And I see Pat there. Are you, Pat? You want to close us out, or we're done?
I just want to join you in expressing our thank you to yourself and to Ambassador Gfoeller and Mr. David Rundell for just an incredible hour of hard to come by insider ball information, boots on the ground that without you gentlemen, you've certainly helped us fulfill our educational mission, and we're ever grateful. So I just want to say thank you, and Colonel, thank you again.
Okay. No, thank you very much, and until next time.